Third-party risks are now your attack surface. Your security posture now includes organizations that you do not control. This is no longer a theoretical statement. It is not a future risk. It is an operational reality that we are already in. In this episode, I'm going to explain why third-party risk has moved from a compliance problem to a survival problem, and why this shift has accelerated over the past year. I will also talk about why CISOs need to change how they talk about this with executives and boards. Because many of the most damaging incidents we have seen recently do not begin with victim organizations. They begin somewhere else. They begin with a vendor, or a managed service provider, or a cloud platform. A piece of trusted software, maybe. From a probability standpoint, third-party compromise is now one of the most likely initial access vectors. From a financial standpoint, the losses still stand or land rather with you, even though it started someplace else. And that combination breaks the way most organizations still think about accountability, control, and risk ownership. So let me start with what has changed. A year ago, third-party risk was still treated largely as a procurement and a compliance exercise. Things like questionnaires, SOC reports, annual reviews, contractual language. Those activities were imperfect, but at least they created some sense of control. Today, that sense of control is largely an illusion. The modern threat environment has shifted in a way that makes third-party compromise not just more common, but more dangerous. Attackers are deliberately targeting vendors because vendors offer leverage. They offer scale. They offer access to trust. They offer access pathways that bypass hardened perimeter defense. This is very important. And they allow attackers to shift cost and consequences onto organizations that did not make the original mistake. This is why so many high-impact incidents now start with somebody else's failure that you now have to deal with. Things like a software update being weaponized, a vendor got compromised, a service provider's credentials were abused, and suddenly your organization is responsible to an incident that you didn't cause. You could not have prevented it directly, but yet you still must fully own. This is where traditional accountability models collapse. Boards often assume that contracts reduce risk. They do not. Contracts define liability after damage occurs. They do not stop attackers. Audits are also assumed to reduce risk. They do not. Audits measure past conditions. They do not prevent outages in real time. Insurance is assumed to reduce risk. It does not. Insurance may help with some financial recovery, but it does not restore operations. It does not protect customers. It does not shorten downtime. In a third-party driven incident, none of these things stop the clock. What matters is something far more operational. Can you disconnect fast? And can you keep operating when you do? Organizations that manage third-party risk well have quietly shifted their focus away from questionnaires and towards dependency mapping. They know which vendors matter and which ones don't. They know which services are critical to revenue, safety, or compliance. They know which third-party failures are survivable and which ones are existential. That knowledge is far more valuable than a clean questionnaire score. Because when a third-party incident occurs, you do not have time to read contracts. You do not have time to debate liability. You have to make immediate decisions about isolation, shutdown, continuity in communication, and those decisions are made under uncertainty. This is where the uncomfortable reality sets in. Some outages will be caused by someone else's mistake. Your customers will not care. They will not care that the root problem was external. They will not care that the vendor failed an audit later. They will not care that legal responsibility sits someplace else. They will only care that your service was unavailable, your system was disrupted, and their data was at risk. From their perspective, you own the outcome. And that is why CISOs need to stop treating third-party risk as a procurement issue and start treating it as an operational risk. This requires a different kind of authority. It means CISOs need the ability to make decisions about third-party connections based on real-time risk, not contractual relationships. It means security teams need to be able to isolate vendors quickly without navigating weeks of internal approvals. It means that third-party dependencies need to be discussed in the same breath as core infrastructure, because in this environment, your attack surface is not bounded by your firewall. It is bounded by your dependencies. Every identity integration, every API connection, every software update pipeline, every outsourced function, this is where modern cyber risk lives. This is why third-party incidents are driving higher recovery costs than many internally caused incidents. When your own systems are compromised, you have direct visibility. You can log controls. Your control access can get reset. Your control remediation timelines. You own all of this. But when a third party is compromised, you lose that control. You don't have it. You are dependent on external investigation timelines. You are dependent on partial information that you now have to report up. You are dependent on someone else's assessment of what happened and what did not happen. That uncertainty is expensive. It forces broader resets. It forces deeper validation. It forces longer periods of constrained operation. And it forces leadership to make decisions without full control, without full information. From a board perspective, this is deeply uncomfortable. Boards like clean lines of responsibility. They like to know who owns what. But third-party risk destroys that simplicity. Responsibility is shared. Control is fragmented. And impact is concentrated on the customer-facing organization. This is why CISOs have to reframe the conversation. So instead of talking about third-party risk as a checklist, talk about it as exposure concentration. Instead of talking about vendor compliance, talk about dependency failure modes. Instead of asking, is the vendor secure, ask, what happens if that vendor fails tomorrow? That question is far more actionable. It forces executives to think in terms of operational resilience, not paperwork. It also surfaces uncomfortable truths. Some vendors are going to be a single point of failure. Some dependencies were never designed with isolation in mind. Some services cannot be disconnected without significant business impact. These realities exist whether leadership wants to acknowledge them or not. The organizations that perform best in third-party incidents are not the ones with the most audits. They are the ones that have already mapped their dependencies and rehearsed the failures. They know which connections can be severed immediately. They know which systems can run in a degraded mode and for how long. They know what continuity actually looks like when a vendor goes dark. So for CISOs, this is the core takeaway. Third-party risk management is no longer about assurance. It is about preparedness. Being prepared to lose access. Being prepared to isolate quickly. Being prepared to operate under constraint. And that requires a different posture and a position with executives and boards. It requires explaining that vendor risk is not abstract, it is operational. It affects revenue, safety, trust, and it cannot be fully outsourced. For boards, the takeaway is equally important. If your organization is deeply dependent on third parties, then your cyber risk is deeply dependent on relationships you do not control. No amount of contractual language changes that. The question is not whether a third party will fail. The question is whether your organization can absorb that failure without a cascading impact. This is why third-party risk now sits at the intersection of cyber, resilience, and business continuity, and why CISOs must have a seat at the table when those dependencies are created, expanded, or entrenched in the organization. Because once a dependency exists, it becomes part of your attack surface, whether you like it or not. In this environment, the stronger security posture is the one with the fewest vulnerabilities. It is the one with the most clarity. Clarity about dependencies, clarity about failure modes, clarity about who decides and how fast. That is where modern cyber risk lives, not inside your firewall, but across the ecosystem you depend on every day. And that is why third parties are now your attack surface. I hope you like and appreciate this. If you do, please follow and subscribe, and I will see you in the next episode.